Vice Chair had a point about the minutes.
Sorry?
No, I'd like to second that.
Okay, thank you very much. Has any other member got any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? No, in that case, all those in favour of adopting them? Anyone against? That is carried, thank you. No urgent business. Public participation will occur as we go through the agenda. Declarations of interest. I think I and a number of members had an email from Mrs. Waugh in connection with agenda item 9, the Lyme Handley application, about 6 weeks ago, I think it must have been, but was not, as far as I know, responded to. But beyond that, I have nothing to suggest. If any other members got any interest to declare? Okay. In that case, we can move on to the agenda properly, which is agenda item 6, which is the Elton Methodist Church at West End, Elton. You're dealing with this, are you, Adele? Thank you.
Thank you. This is a referral item, members dealt with it at the last planning committee. The purpose of a referral report is to set out the implications of approving an application that is contrary to policy. And the report should assess the risks and whether the approval is a major departure. So approval of this scheme is a departure from core strategy policy HC4 and DMS2 of the Development Management Plan. These policies are long-standing and their purpose is to ensure that, if possible, community services and facilities are retained and that any new uses should also serve a community need. To comply with these policies, the application must demonstrate, firstly, that community use of the building is no longer needed, available elsewhere, or not viable. And secondly, that reasonable attempts to secure another community use have been made. These particular policy requirements are really important because without this information, an objective assessment of the application is more difficult. In this case, no such evidence has been submitted, hence the refusal. The recommendation for refusal. In the committee report, there's a section on cases that have relevance to this decision, and a recent appeal decision has just come in on the 7th of April, which was for change of use of an old school to a dwelling in Great Longston, and that appeal was dismissed. And the reason for dismissal is material to this discussion, because very limited or no details as to why the community use were submitted with that application. So there wasn't sufficient information with the application to satisfy the requirements of policy. So that was effectively upheld with this recent decision coming on the 7th of April. Members are urged to carefully consider the strength of other evidence and weigh these in the balance against the strong policy recommendations set out. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Members? Ginny?
Thank you.
Oh, we've got a couple of speakers. I do apologise. I do apologise. Sorry. Right, I have the two speakers. I don't know whether we've got them in the right order, but I've got Michelle Cartwright and Nick Marriott. Is that the right order? Right, Ms. Cartwright, would you like to come forward, please?
We thank you for your support at the last meeting. When we purchased our home in 2016, we knew the Methodist Church was privately leasing the chapel to our neighbour as a hobby room, and it had not been used by the community since it stopped being a place of worship 5 years earlier. Since then, we have approached the Methodist Church to establish whether they would sell the chapel to us. We believe we held the key to resolving many of its developmental shortcomings by taking control of its future. We knew we could provide a sustainable use for it at no cost to our or the community's amenities. As you know, the chapel is surrounded by our home on 3 sides. Our application uses our land for all storage and connectivity to our utilities and an off-road parking space. No other option can offer this. Any local housing option would be considerably smaller by design, having no access to our outhouse for the proposed bathroom, etc., that would have to be accommodated elsewhere within the building. When we recently purchased the chapel in 2020, it was advertised for sale in the same way and sold at the same public auction as the chapel in Thornhill referenced in the officer's report. Any person or collective interested in buying it for any purpose had equal opportunity to do so. We have engaged with the parish council who support our application and who have clearly stated that there are more than enough underutilised community spaces in Elton to meet current and future needs, and each is in need of funding. In 2024, Elton Village Hall had community and private event bookings for less than 20% of its available time. Elton also has the Jubilee Field Pavilion, a large two-storey facility with similar, if not less, utilisation. In fact, it was minuted as part of the February meeting that a recommendation had been made to the parish council that the two community spaces be merged into one to decrease cost and increase utilisation. Elton has many other community assets: the pub, the church, the school, a visiting library and post office, and Winster Shop. To summarise, the chapel was sold in open auction in 2020 when a purchase for use as a community asset could have been made. We believe we and the parish council have sufficiently evidenced that there is no need for a further community asset. Our planned investment looks to enhance this non-designated heritage asset with a view to securing its future as part of our home. We also had the support of 10 of your votes in favour of our application at the last meeting, and we respectfully request your approval once more. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nick Marriott.
Hello again. The purpose of the policy is to protect existing community facilities. That point is not in question, but the planning implication of processing a 10-year redundant Methodist chapel is not the same magnitude of issue as a similar application dealing with, say, the only pub in the village which is facing closure, or the post office which has been a cornerstone of the community forever, or more critically, to prevent the cashing in of a freehold owner at the expense of the community who stand to lose a shop or a pub, post office or a village hall. This has been brought back to you because officers believe it represents a severe departure from policy. Of two comparative cases provided in the report, the first was another of my projects. In fact, that chapel in Thornhill was bought at the very same auction as Elton Chapel and advertised in the very same way. For one reason or another, I processed that application first. It was approved under delegated powers following some detailed debate regarding its heritage and impact of the development upon it. The usual stuff. And apart from it not being in a designated settlement, it shared many similarities with this chapel. I went on to submit this case 2 days after Thornhill was approved. In the officer's report, it clarifies that in the case of Thornhill, the chapel was not located within a designated settlement, and that may have been a consideration in rationalising the loss of a community facility. To be clear, and specifically because your policy assessment of this application has been brought into question, it not being in a settlement may have been a consideration. However, within the delegated report, it doesn't reference the loss of community facility once, nor the policies, not once. What I don't know is whether that was an oversight on the part of the park or whether it was simply a case of common sense prevailing. What I do know is that much like this case, what the community lost was definitely outweighed by the investment in the building. The point I'm trying to make is it such a departure from policy to approve a new use for a redundant, non-designated heritage asset? Who loses if this is approved? There is no evidence whatsoever of a loss to the community in this case. That is what the policy seeks to avoid. We have gone to more than reasonable lengths to demonstrate the chapel isn't required and that its loss will not diminish the viability of Elton community. This application does not represent a decision that will blow up in the faces of the park. If discord was to manifest, it would likely come from within the community. But they are on the side of approval in this case. This isn't a dangerous departure from policy. In my opinion, given the specifics of this case, it really isn't a departure at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mike. Right, start again. Members, any member wish to speak? Ginny.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, this is we have policies in place for specific reasons, and this is to protect community assets. But I believe in this case, it's been very much proved that this is an accepted exception, and that because of where the chapel is, the fact that it is very much would conflict with the applicant's privacy if it was to be used for a community use, and the fact that it's been redundant, the fact that it was sold in open market, I believe that we should make an exception of the policy and approve this. So I'm moving it for approval.
Seconded. Any other members wish to speak? Ken, and then Kath.
Thank you, Chair. I recognise the strength of opinion. I recognise the arguments that the speakers have made, and I recognise the direction of travel that members were heading in from our previous meeting. I would only make the point that we've already heard the word common sense used. Common sense, like a good many things, is a relative concept. My version of common sense is often different to other people's versions of common sense. And as Nick, the agent, has said, in part in his submission, there's no evidence of need. As far as I'm concerned, that's entirely the point. We don't have evidence of no need. And that's the whole point of the policy. And that's what the planning inspector, why the planning inspector dismissed the appeal on the Lungston property, because there was no evidence. It may be an onerous burden, and it may be the opinion of those involved that it's the obvious thing to do to approve this, but nevertheless we are supposed to make decisions on the basis of evidence, and there isn't any evidence. The appropriate processes haven't been gone through. That's all I would say, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Kath?
Thank you, Chair. I did wonder whether to not be in on this meeting because I'm a regular worshipper at a chapel and not far from this one. I'm speaking from that angle. I would much sooner, when the one I go through becomes redundant, that it be used for the community for something worthwhile, something positive that could benefit the community. But if that is not forthcoming, do I want to see a pile of stones in years to come? No, I don't. So I think, from my point of view, I've got to act rationally and sensibly and agree, and that's why I seconded your approval.
Thank you very much. Matt Butler?
Yeah, again, as I said at the last meeting, I'm the District Council Ward member for Elton, so I regularly attend Elton Parish Council meetings and can confirm the point that that Nick made, that it comes up every Elton Parish Council meeting. What on earth are they going to do about the parish? How are they going to sustain the hall? How are they going to find the funding for the hall? Because they haven't got funding for the hall. If you look at the minutes of the Elton Parish Council meeting, you will see evidence of no need. That there is an evidence of sufficient need. So I completely agree with Ginny that this isn't about making a case for disbanding the policy. The policy is critically important, but I think the fact that the Methodist Church let the building to somebody for a hobby room for a number of years before they then sold it on the open market suggests that they thought that there wasn't a need for it, and so I would absolutely support the application.
Thank you very much. It seems to me, actually, that the arguments are slightly different from what we've been hearing, but they're still there. If you do what the policy requires, which is to put this on the open market to see what will come, the decision as to what is going to be an acceptable use in planning terms may well be a different decision from what would be acceptable to the owners given the close proximity of this site to where they live. I mean, we might, for example, find it perfectly acceptable for there to be used, say, as a children's play facility of some sort, which will have kids there and cars coming and toing and froing. That's a perfectly good community use. It's not dissimilar from that of a chapel. Why would we refuse it? But there's no way that an owner is going to put their property on the market for that sort of purpose if it's going to cause a disturbance to their quiet and enjoyment and so forth. So having put it on the market and gone through all of that quite expensive process, you come back to a decision as to whether as to what actually happens. And the reality is that these owners are not going to approve any sort of use which is going to upset and disturb their peace and quiet. And the idea that we go through that big sort of bureaucratic process to get to that point seems to be not very helpful. And what does seem to me to be helpful is to put this quite attractive little building to some good and worthwhile use before it starts to deteriorate further. I'm picking up Kath's point there. That's what would be going through my mind. But I support the motion, but perhaps for slightly different reasons than other members have put forward. Any other member wish to speak? In that case, all those in favour of the motion, which is to approve this application, all those in favour? Those against? And one abstention. Thank you very much. Is there another one? Who's the other abstention? Rachel, okay. 2 abstention, I apologise. Right, let's move on now, please, to agenda item 7, which is the New Haven Holiday Park. Right, Mark's dealing with this.
Dal's going to take the referral.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Chair. This is another referral report. The proposed siting of 24 static holiday caravans with additional landscaping in lieu of 20 touring caravans and 2 tented camping areas at New Haven Holiday Park, New Haven. It's a matter that was referred from the last committee because of the policy implications. So the purpose of this report is to set out the implications of approving an application that's contrary to policy, assessing risks and whether the approval would be a major departure. So approval of this scheme is a departure from policy RT3B of the core strategy, which states that static caravans, chalets or lodges will not be permitted. This is a long-standing policy approach that precedes the current core strategy and is proposed to be carried forward in the new local plan. The reason for this long-standing restrictive approach is because it is necessary to deliver the National Park's first purpose, and this reasoning is set out in section 2 of the referral report in front of you. For the reasons set out in the original report and at paragraph 2.5 and 2.8 of the referral report, the application is not considered to be a major departure from the development plan, and the risk that long-standing policy would be undermined by approving this application is considered to be low. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this was fairly well agreed at the last meeting. I'm going to move it for approval from the Chair, actually. That's Matt?
Yeah, we asked at the last one for a condition to be put in there which isn't in the list of conditions, which was about electric vehicle charging points. That there was going to be as part of the parking plan, that there was going to be an agreed...
well spotted, you're absolutely right. Okay, can that be included? In that case, I will amend my motion to include that. Is it seconded? Is that seconded? Has any other members got any comments to make on that? No? All those in favour? Anyone against? That is carried. So we're now moving on to the new the extension, etc., at Old Hall, Creamery Lane, Parwich. Who's dealing with this? This is Mark again. Are we going to get ahead of ourselves, aren't we? Are we going to call Andrew down shortly? I don't know.
I think it's okay because they're reading a statement out and then
Yes. Yes. Okay. Right. Are you? Yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for a rear and side extension and a new glass house at Old Hall on Creamery Lane in Parwich. You can see the location plan on the screen here. You can see it's addressed as Knob Hall. It's the same property, and it's accessed off Creamery Lane. It's within the village conservation area, and the property is a Grade 2 listed dwelling house, dating from the mid-17th century, albeit with some remodelling at the start of the 20th century. And you can see it sits within a large plot, and Barn Cottage to the north is the nearest neighbouring property. And this shows the position of the proposed development. So this is a rear extension, rear and side extension. So this is you shall see in the photographs, this is the principal elevation of the building, and this is the rear. And so this is a rear and side, because of course it's coming past the side of the building here. And also application also proposes a replacement greenhouse in this corner of the plot. So this is the principal elevation, as both existing and proposed. There's no changes there. And this is the southeast side elevation, where the same applies. And this is the existing rear. And the lean-to that you can see built into the property here was added, according to the application, in roughly 1925. It accommodates a stair. And then this is the proposed, which includes a near flat-roofed extension, which is shown slightly differently here too on the proposed floor plans. And this wall is actually coming forward, coming off the edge of this here, which you'll see better in the floor plans. And this projects as far forward as this rear wall, which again will become more apparent on the other plans. I should correct myself as well as being for the extension and the greenhouse. The application also includes an external boiler in the position of this red hatching here. On site yesterday, the applicant did say they don't intend to take that forward, but it hasn't been formally withdrawn from the application. Still forms part of the proposals. And this shows the existing side elevation, the northwest, and there with the extension as proposed. So you can see the flat roof coming across, essentially flush with the rear projection there. This is the existing stairwell lean-to, which you can see, which becomes sandwiched between the two. And this is a roof lantern on top of the flat roof. That's the existing ground floor plan. So you can see the stair enclosed in that extension here. At the moment, the kitchen is contained within this space, going through to a pantry. And as proposed, so the extension, as I explained when we saw the elevation plan, actually comes off the front of that stairwell wall and then returns. The red annotations are areas to be demolished or removed. For the most part, those are internal and are not subject to permission under this application, but they would require listed building consent. And the existing first floor and proposed, you can see the roof lantern there and the the extension. And this is the proposed greenhouse, traditional design. And just go through some photographs. It's the front of the house. The side, this is the side that's unaffected, of course. And now looking back at the rear of the property, so you can see the stairwell extension here as it stands at the moment. You can see the edge of the greenhouse, the existing greenhouse in the photograph here, which would be replaced. And that's more closely showing the rear corner where the new extension would go. And from the side, that same area of the building. And then looking back down the garden, and that's the position of the existing and roughly the position of the proposed greenhouse. So as you'll have seen from the report, the application is recommended for refusal. In relation to the greenhouse, there's no objections to that part of the proposal. Our concerns relate to the extension and the external boiler. The application doesn't include sufficient heritage assessment for us to fully understand the impacts on the heritage significance of the building. And as a result, we can't understand what harm would arise in that regard. However, we do, and as set out in the report, have concerns more generally about the form and the position and arrangement of the extension. We just can't fully assess those impacts because we haven't got that heritage assessment. Significantly, as I said at the start, the building is listed, and a listed building consent application was submitted in parallel with this, but has been withdrawn during the course of the application. And without having that listed building consent in place, our view is that it would be prejudicial to grant planning permission. We have to consider the significance of the listed building in all of our planning decisions. If we haven't had a listed building consent application submitted to us, which makes those assessments, we can't soundly reach a position where we approve this application in our view as officers. For those reasons, the application is recommended for refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We have one speaker. Oh, no, we don't. We have a statement to be read out. You're doing that, are you, Karen? Thank you.
Old Hall is a good example of a 17th century yeoman's house. Built in 1690, it was a residence until 1900 before becoming a creamery. It stayed as such until 1925 when the creamery closed and the building reverted back to residential use. The owners at the time rented the building to an architect from Berkshire who, in turn for accommodation, redesigned the internal space to suit early 20th century living, namely small rooms with individual fireplaces. The house was at one time divided into flats, but became a single residence in the second half of the 20th century. To our knowledge, the house remained empty for 10 years until we purchased it in November 2021. In the 4 years we have lived at Old Hall, we have given a great deal of thought as to how we can update the property for 21st century living without detracting from its heritage. My wife, being a local interior designer, has worked on the renovation refurbishment of a number of similar properties throughout the county. She has stipulated that construction must be sympathetic to the building in local stone to match existing walls. We are also cognizant of the importance of not impacting on the local area and have already received tacit support from the parish council to our plans. The new extension cannot be seen from the road. More importantly, our proposed single-storey extension will have no impact on our neighbours as it cannot be seen from any angle. Finally, our proposed site for a new, larger greenhouse is purely to replace an existing one. This will assist us to become more self-sufficient, growing our own vegetables and fruit in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, can I just, actually I've only just noticed this, but can I just on the third reason for refusal, the last sentence, it would also not be appropriate to grant a planning permission that would not be capable of development. When did that come as a planning principle, as a matter of interest? Do you understand the point I'm making? I mean,
well, I think it's...
You can grant all sorts of planning permissions for things that can never happen, and which do never happen.
Well, they might never happen, but they should be capable of implementation.
Okay,
that's why we use granting conditions where we can. You can't do that here because the listed building consent isn't granted. If you grant this and the listed building consent is then refused, then
yes, you're making an assumption in that sentence. Okay, right. Right, members, we did a site visit on this yesterday. Ken? Mike?
Thank you, Chair. I think we have to recognise this is a listed building, and as a result, it requires even higher standards of approaches to development than a non-listed building, even though a non-listed building might be not as defined, might be a non-designated heritage asset. I am concerned that the applicant was advised 2 years ago for their proposals then that they needed to provide sufficient information so that their proposal could be fully assessed. 2 years on, we receive a proposal but still with insufficient information. And certainly on the site visit, and I think if Mark could go back to, I think, the third slide from the end, which shows the both sets of fenestration in that corner. That one. The net result of the proposal would be the removal of the two lower windows on the right-hand side, and then the obscuring of the two windows on the left-hand side, and partial obscuring of the sills of the window above. Those, for me, are significant impacts on a listed building, and we need the information of what those impacts might be. That's the whole point of heritage statements or heritage assessments, to demonstrate what impact there will be, what mitigation measures there are being provided to soften those impacts, and they aren't being provided. And I don't see that the applicant can claim that they weren't aware that they should provide that information. So on that reason alone, Chair, I think the recommendation for refusal is entirely appropriate.
Thank you. Mike?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to propose that as a motion, unless that was Ken proposing it, in which case I'll second. I think it's very interesting that in terms of procedure, that the listed building consent application has been withdrawn, and that the applicant has not chosen to get an agent to put sound reasons for approval forward to back this up. We really do need a heritage statement if the applicant is going to have that part of the building extended in any way. I've also got concerns about the flat roof proposal in addition to that, but I'm not sure that you could add that as an additional reason for refusal.
Well, I'm going to suggest that you could.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that even without all this other information, that particular design is not one that we're ever likely to approve.
Yeah.
Is that fair enough? Planners? Yep. Yeah. Can I suggest that we add that as a fourth reason for refusal?
Yeah.
Okay. You're happy with that, are you? And Ken, did you second his motion?
I shall, yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Other members? Matt, and then Bill.
Have I? Sorry. I don't have a particular issue with flat roofs. I don't have a particular issue. That seems like a reasonable use of space. However, I don't think we can approve it because we haven't got the information that we need to approve it. And so, if the only alternative is refusing it, then I completely agree with refusing it because we can't approve it.
Okay, thank you. Bill?
Just to briefly echo the thoughts of the previous speakers, but also to add, I mean, we saw it yesterday. It's a large property with very attractive historic features, but and obviously it's got a very varied history which we don't really know about. So that's really important, and that's not been demonstrated. It's also quite a large building, so in terms of so perhaps looking at it from a climate and ecological point of view, there's no demonstrated need to extend it. Just extending buildings for the sake of it. It is a big building, and why extend it? It's clearly been bought very recently. It's been bought as it is. So, that was obviously been bought because it's a very large historic and attractive building. So, so I support the motion to refuse for all the reasons mentioned before.
Thank you. That Ken Richardson.
I presume there's been regular dialogue with the applicant, because it seems funny that telling him that it's going to be a car crash and then wanting to bring it forward to board.
We raised our concerns regarding the lack of heritage assessment at a relatively early stage, and the agent, presumably on that basis, withdrew the listed building consent application. Whether they, I don't know why they pursued the planning application, so I can't answer that question. I'll just respond briefly to Bill's point, if I can, as well, about the need for extension. Our planning policies don't make any requirement of a demonstration of need for household extensions. That's the owner's prerogative.
I think that must be right. Okay, any other member wish to speak? In that case, I will move it. I will put it to the vote in accordance with Mike's motion as amended. All those in favour of refusing? Anyone against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Right. Right, the next application we have is for Cornfield Barn, Lyme Hamley, agenda item 9, and right, Hannah, you're going to introduce it for us.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning. Just before I start the presentation, just to update you that since the committee report was written, we have received one additional letter of support in favour of the application. That letter raises no new issues that are not already covered in the committee report, but that does bring the total number of letters in support to 17. So just on to the application. This is Cornfield Barn, and it's an application proposing conversion of the barn to a dwelling, and that application is part retrospective. So this is, you can see the location of the barn. Historically, we understand it was associated with Cornfield Farm to the west. We understand ownership between the two was split in 2002. So the barn is no longer related with that property. It's located to the south of Cornfield Road here and is 1.2 kilometres north of Kettleshume. Just to mention as well that the barn is considered to be an undesignated asset, so it's a traditional gritstone roadside barn with slate roof. Just before I talk through the proposals, I just want to update you on the planning history of the site, because that is an important factor as part of this application. So permission was granted in 2009 to convert the barn to stables and holiday let. That permission was implemented and was later varied in 2020, and there was a condition on the original permission which restricts occupancy of the building as a permanent dwelling, in line with the authority's policies at the time of the original application. So the building has now been converted and is currently in occupation as a dwelling, and this application seeks permission for that use. So this was the site plan that was originally approved, and this is the site as existing. So you can see the general layout is fairly similar. This is what's proposed. I think the only thing to note is these structures are proposed for removal. Just so members are aware, those structures are unauthorised. They don't have planning permission, and they're currently subject to separate enforcement proceedings. So we haven't given their removal any weight in terms of the recommendation. These are the east and west elevations that were approved, and these are as existing now. This is a later structure, but you can see no change to the openings. And again, in terms of what's now proposed, there's no changes. The approved north elevation and the existing, so again, there's similarity between the two. And proposed, the only change is to this opening here to introduce more light into, this is the stable space that's proposed for conversion. That's the approved and existing south elevation, and the proposed. So again, the only change is to this door here, again to allow more light into the building. This was the approved floor plan. So this was the holiday let, and this is a stable space with void over. And this is what's existing now. So there is a minor change to the layout, but there is accommodation and stables. And this is what is proposed. So there's a reconfiguration of the ground floor and conversion within the stable space to provide a bedroom, study and ensuite. This is just for context to show photos of the barn prior to conversion in 2009. And this is the barn as it is now. You will have seen on site yesterday. So that's the north elevation facing the road. That's the east. That's the south. You can see the structures I mentioned earlier in the background. And that's the west elevation. In terms of the application, as you will have seen in the committee report, the application is recommended for refusal. We consider there is an in-principle issue with the proposed development because the application is proposing an unrestricted dwelling within the building, and our policies say there are only exceptional circumstances where new houses are appropriate in the national park. For market dwellings, that is where development is required to achieve conservation or enhancement of a heritage asset. And in this case, as you can see on the photos, we consider that conservation has already been achieved. So the dwelling is not necessary to achieve conservation. That is a policy position that we have consistently applied on other applications, and we have been successful defending that on appeal as well. So that forms one reason for refusal. The other reason refusal relates to protected species. There is a bat survey report that advises there is potential for bats within the building. However, it requires further survey work to be undertaken for emergent surveys, and we have not had those surveys, so we're unable to conclude the potential impact of the development on protected species. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have one speaker, Mrs. Waugh. You've been watching what goes on. I hope you understand the process. There's a little button on your machine that will turn the light on behind the microphone. And you have 3 minutes.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Firstly, I'd like to raise our concern over Condition 18, which restricts the barn's use to holiday accommodation and ties its ownership to Cornfield Farm. In our view, this condition does not meet the 6 legal tests required by policy. The main farmhouse was sold in 2002, several years before the barn's approval in 2009. The condition could never have been complied with at that time, nor since, and we therefore question its legality. Importantly, the holiday let has never been implemented. A lawful start was made through access works in 2011. Work began in 2019, and we later received approval in 2020 to vary 4 of the conditions. I ask you to consider the exceptional and compassionate circumstances of my case. In 2019, we sold our home and moved into rented accommodation. Our youngest son started senior school, but soon developed serious mental health issues. Despite continuous professional support, his condition worsened. Upon advice, we removed him from school, I gave up work to support him, and we began homeschooling. The instability of rental life made everything harder. It was unfamiliar and unsettling for our son, and the property had sewage problems which added to the stress. Then the pandemic hit. Support services closed, we had nowhere else to turn. The barn became our sanctuary, familiar, safe and surrounded by nature. It gave our son a sense of grounding and a chance to begin healing. We've lived here continuously since April 2021. We understand we don't meet the strict criteria for a local needs dwelling under current policy, and I haven't tried to claim that. The barn and land are deeply personal to me, they're part of who I am. I grew up on Cornfield Farm from 1975 and attended the local school. My mum was a local teacher and my dad farmed the land. My grandparents lived just down the lane since the 50s and their ashes are scattered in the fields. In December 91, my dad tragically passed away on the farm. It was an incredibly difficult time for our family. We made 2 applications to live at the barn so I could support my mum, but both were refused. She had no choice but to sell the farm in 2002, but we held on to the barn and land as it meant too much to us all to let it go, and I continue to care for the animals daily. We've worked hard to restore and protect this beautiful landscape. The pod and storage container were brought in only as temporary measures and will be removed. We're also aware that while no bats were found in the March survey, a further survey is required to confirm this and can only be undertaken from May onwards. If members are otherwise supportive of our application, we respectfully request the decision be deferred to allow time for this survey to take place. From your site visit, I hope it was clear how much we love and care we have for preserving the barn. We came here to protect our family during an incredible difficult time and live in a place that means so much to us. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Right, members, we did a site visit yesterday, which I think was quite instructive. Any member wish to open the discussion? In that case, okay, Ken, if you'd like to start.
All right, someone has to, I suppose, Joe. So thank you. And thank you for the applicant for the background, for which I think we would have every sympathy. It does seem to me, Chair, that the issue is one of people's circumstances change, but our policies don't. And I think that's appropriate that our policies don't. And that's where we are. We're between the rock and a hard place of our policies look to use conversions as a means of conserving, in this case, a non-designated heritage asset. The application that went through previously and that has been implemented has done just that. And we therefore are in that cleft stick, rock and a hard place, whatever metaphor you want to use, of being asked to accommodate particular needs that can't be accommodated through our current policy elements. I do wonder whether I would ask perhaps through you, Chair, of our officers, if there are any ways in which the requirements on the one hand can be fulfilled, but our policies can be met by examining the nature of the application that's being made. And on the back of the request for deferment pending further surveys from the applicant's perspective, whether we might consider deferring for both surveys to be done, but a further consideration and dialogue with the applicant to see whether there are any ways in which our joint requirements could be accommodated.
I'm very grateful to you for that, Ken, because I think that's pointing in the right direction. I think that really is. Other members? Bill?
Just for clarification, there's 2 unauthorised buildings on the site. What's the status of that at the moment?
Yeah, so the buildings don't have planning permission because permitted development rights have been restricted on the site. They're unauthorised and an enforcement notice has been served on those structures, but it's not yet come into effect.
Actually, I have a very important question. Sorry to be frivolous. What's a cat side aspect?
I'll just show you, gone the wrong way. So it's just this to the rear, the roof, where it continues.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Did you want Charlotte to give a view on the legality?
Yes, if you like.
There was a question about the legality of the condition.
Okay. No, that's fine. What Brian is asking me, there's a reference in the report to the legality of the condition. And well, would you like to talk about it rather than me doing it for you?
I don't know whether members have had a chance to look at that. I think generally in terms of the interpretation of conditions, you look at the condition as a whole and the purpose for which it has been imposed. And I think when you look at this condition, the nature of it is very clear. So the fact, unfortunately, there's a small section in it that suggests that the holiday barn should be linked to the main dwelling. That's a sentence in its own. It doesn't necessarily tie into the rest of the condition, which restricts the occupation of the barn to a holiday let. So I think legally, should that be challenged, there'd be a very strong argument for the authority to argue that the condition is enforceable in terms of the holiday let restriction, and that should remain on the permission, because it's ultimately tied into the whole purpose of the permission and the reason why it was granted in the first place. So if it was argued, we would simply ask for a court to strike out the element which is not appropriate, which is the element which says it's tied to the main dwelling house, which has now been sold. I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions, just let me know.
Thank you very much. It seems to me that there are one or two things in here that just need sort of teasing out a little bit. I think the notion that you could describe the whole of this building as a local needs dwelling might be stretching it a bit. But if you talk about the existing house as it is, which is 110 square metres, compared with 97, which is our maximum for an affordable house, bear in mind this is a building conversion. I don't feel that I can spend a lot of time arguing about that if there's a way through to looking at that. There may be other ways in which we can look at what that accommodation is and see what is possible. It's unfortunate, really, and the officers have pointed this out to me. At the time when the original permission was granted, the only policy was that a barn conversion had to be used for holiday lets. If that application had been made about 4 years later, which let's face it, was before it was converted to a holiday let, then of course it would have justified itself for being done up as a full dwelling house, because you could have made the conservation case. In the event it was done up 2019, did we hear? 2018, 2019. There are a series of unfortunates in this which make one feel a bit uncomfortable about the way the whole thing's going. Mike?
I'm picking up on what you're saying, Patrick, and what Ken was saying earlier. I think that the smart thing here would be to bring a motion for deferral. We do need to resolve the potential for bat species occupying part of the building, and so we would have to come back for that anyway if we were going to do anything other than refuse this application. But I don't think, having heard the applicant's circumstances, I don't think I can bring myself to go with the officer recommendation here. So I'm going to bring a motion for deferral.
Is that seconded? Ginny?
Yes, I'm happy to second it, but I just wondered whether there was, and I support everything that's been said so far, but I just wondered whether there was a case to be made for local occupancy, because this applicant has a very strong local connections, so I just wondered whether that was something that could be considered.
Adam?
Yeah, just really reflecting the point Ginny was making. If members can be clear, I think I understand, but if members can be clear the reasons for deferral, I understand protected species is one. Do I understand the second one is to explore whether there's the potential to use this as a local need, affordable dwelling, explore that with the applicant to see if there's a solution there? Is that what members are saying?
That and other possibilities. I mean, there may be the opportunity for some sort of temporary approval, or there may be some other options that we could look at. I don't know, but
I'm not sure I would say that from my perspective. We can think about that, but
yeah.
I think the local need option would seem to be the better one from my
I'm
perspective.
not against that, by any means. Any other member wish to speak? In that case, the motion is to defer for those discussions to take place. All those in favour? Anyone against? No, that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Waugh. We're not promising anything. Can I make that absolutely clear? Because there is a clear division between policy here and your circumstances, but we'll try and work with you and see what's possible. Okay? It's now 5 to 11. We are slightly ahead of time, I think. Not that that matters at the moment. I'm going to ask whether members would like to have a short break. 11:05 by that clock? Okay? We will adjourn until 11:05. By that clock, we're just after 11:05, so we will, I think, resume. And the next item we have on the agenda is the Edale report, agenda item 10, and you're introducing this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So just before I start this presentation, I just want to update members that following completion of the committee report, we have received some further comments on the application. So we've received one additional letter of objection from one new party and 4 further letters of objection received from existing parties who've already commented on the application. So I will summarise the matters raised that are not covered in the report. There is a continued concern about the impact of heritage, including lack of specialist heritage input or statement and understanding of the impact of the development on the historic environment and concern about harm to that environment. Concern with who has been consulted on the application, including Historic England and the authority's built environment team. Impacts in terms of sustainability, impacts on wildlife, continued concern about impact on the safety of the public right of way. So that includes increased use, obstruction, management and drainage, and liability if any accidents occur, and impact on users of the right of way, including those with disabilities. There are concerns that the campsite is increasing tourism in the area. Requests for a sign along the right of way to advise vehicle users that the route is a footpath. Concern about how the parking spaces will be managed. Concerns on the scale and impacts on character of the development, including the proportionality of the business as a whole to Edale. Concerns about impact on the landscape. How access will be achieved between the car parking spaces and Field 3. A request to move all parking spaces into the campsite internally and for an options appraisal on that. Request for conservation management plan. Suggestion as better locations for the general use as a whole. Concerns about amenity, including pollution and impact on the countryside. And concerns with the erection of a fence on the south edge of Field 4, but that is a separate matter to this application. Onto the application. So the application relates to Newfold Farm, Cooper's Caravan Site and Cafe in Edale. This is the location of the site here. So you're just in the northern part of Edale to the west of the centre of the village. And this is the campsite. You've got the start of the Pennine Way to the north of the site. You've got a public right of way running along the south edge of the site, and the entire site is within Edale Conservation Area. The application is proposing variation of conditions 2 and 4 on an existing permission for alterations to the campsite, including changes to parking, landscaping and access. Condition 2 is the approved plans and condition 4 is the landscaping for that scheme. So this was the site as existing. You can see the campsite and there's a 4-field arrangement. You had some static caravans up there. And this was the scheme that was approved. I just want to draw members' attention firstly to these arrows. Basically what they're indicating is a one-way system around the site. You can see one way out here, and the position of parking spaces in Field 3, because that is the subject of this application. So the parking spaces, you can see they are flush with this track to the south, which is the public right-of-way. I'm just going to come back to that in a second, but this was the approved landscaping scheme that went with that permission as well. So if you look again at this area, you can see that there is a clear conflict between the position of the parking spaces and the landscaping. They're both in the same place. So the applicant has started to provide the parking spaces in the position shown on the approved site plan, but wants to resolve conflict with the landscaping. So this is what is now proposed. So you can see there are some additional car parking spaces, and some of those have been put in. And again, the parking spaces, they are flush with the track. This is the extent of the right-of-way to the south. And just to talk you through this arrangement, during the course of this application, there was an objection from the right-of-way officer at the Highways Authority due to concerns about safety on the right-of-way with vehicles reversing onto the track because of the arrangement that vehicles would basically come along the track, pull in and reverse back out. So because of that, the application has been amended to include this loop here. So vehicles would come along, turn in, pull into the spaces and then come back out in a forward gear. So highways are satisfied with that arrangement. The landscaping has been moved to the north here, and there is a gap at the end to get through into the field. And you'll notice that the one-way annotations are no longer part of the proposals. It's understood that was not actually the intention with the existing scheme, but nonetheless it was on the approved plan. This is just a closer shot of the proposed landscaping for the area, so you can see trees, understory planting, and there would be some planting between some of the parking spaces and here as well. This is a photo of the site, so you are travelling west along the right of way, and this is just before you get to the bottom end of Field 3. This is the parking area here. You can see that the parking has already been put in, not quite in accordance with the approved plan, but it does reflect the location shown on the site plan. And this is the right of way here, and it turns off to the left, and this is Field 3. That is beyond the site. I think this is owned by the applicant, but that's an agricultural building, so that's just showing the boundary once you come towards the end of that track. This is looking north into Field 3, and this is looking south, so this is the right of way and track, and you can see there is landscaping along that edge. So in terms of the proposals, officers do think it is regrettable that we're losing the landscaped edge along the public right of way, and as part of the application we did ask the applicant if they would consider putting landscaping back and in effect having an arrangement. I'll just show you where this would be landscaped and they could turn in, reverse and leave again. The applicant didn't want to do that because they had concerns that in turn reversing into the field would cause safety issues on the campsite, and if they had boundaries on both sides that would end up taking a larger proportion of the field, which officers recognise it would be unreasonable to insist upon because of the existing permission which shows parking in that space already. So given they've got permission to do that, we couldn't necessarily insist on them moving the parking spaces. The scheme that's been put forward does include landscaping to the north, and that would be beneficial as it would help screen the parking spaces from higher ground to the north. And there is, as you saw on the picture, landscaping to the south already that helps screen the parking from that direction. So we do consider that the change would be well enclosed within its immediate setting. And in terms of impact, we do recognise the concerns about impact on the conservation area, but given the existing site context, which is a large campsite and an existing permission showing parking in that location, we feel that the change is proportionate to that setting and that the impact is acceptable on the landscape character of the area and the conservation area. So the application is recommended for approval, and I just want to mention, in addition to the committee report, there are just 2 additional conditions that are being suggested. One is for these EV charging spaces to be provided within 6 months, because we understand the spaces have been set out but the charging pods haven't been provided. The applicant is happy to do so within that period. And also for a sign along this right of way just to advise vehicles that it is a footpath and to drive carefully, just in recognition that some concerns have been raised by third parties. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I ask, has this been assessed from high viewpoints as well as on the ground, as it were?
Under the original application, there was a landscape and visual impact assessment, and that did assess the application from high viewpoints. So I've had consideration towards that as part of this assessment, but they've not resubmitted that as part of the latest proposal. But in terms of views, we consider there's landscaping to the south and then there's additional landscaping to the north that would enclose that parking.
Okay, thank you. Members? Yes, Rachel.
Hi, yeah, could I just ask if there's been a BNG assessment that's been taken place, looking at what was proposed and now what is being proposed, and if there is a net loss associated with that?
There's not been a BNG assessment because this is a Section 73 application, and also technically the works have happened, so it would be part retrospective. BNG isn't required in those circumstances.
Other members? Ken? And then Ginny.
Thank you, Chair. It seems to me that there are some distinct advantages with the proposal as it stands in terms of enclosing the cars. I mean, I'm mindful that from one of the photographs there's a long field that runs away that is necessarily, I think, or inevitably, the cars parked there will be visible. But this, as proposed, it does seem to me, it hides the cars more. It is adjacent to an already existing track that is used to get to the farm, the agricultural side of the business. I think it's appropriate, the additional condition that Anna is proposing for signage to make sure that people are aware it's a public right-of-way. It's a pre-existing permission, it's a tweaking. I think it's a positive development, Chair, and if necessary, I'm happy to move the recommendation.
It is necessary, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other members wish to speak? Ginny.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a question about the fact that they've increased the number of car parking spaces from 14 to 22. That seems quite a big increase. Is there a reasoning why?
I don't know the specific reason. I presume it's just to support operation of a campsite. In terms of that increase, we consider it's proportionate to the scale of the campsite as a whole, but I assume it's just to manage demand.
Matt?
Yeah, from the original one, the approved thing, there was obviously quite a lot of detail in the landscaping plan. Have we had that level of detail for this amendment? Because you know, if you end up with a series of trees which looks like that along there, then that's going to be quite, you know, that isn't going to provide those benefits that we want. So I think it'd be really good to make sure that we've got the layout scheme that we want.
This is the landscaping scheme that is being proposed. It does dovetail with the existing landscaping plan, just in terms of some of the annotations you see that refer to species, but that's the scheme that we have in front of us that's been provided.
Okay. I'd have it proposed. Does somebody wish to second it? Mike, thank you very much. Any other members wish to speak? All those in favour of approving it on the terms set out, including those extra conditions? Anyone against? Anyone abstaining? No, that's approved. Thank you. We're now moving on to Andrew Cook's monitoring and annual enforcement report. Right, Andrew, when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. I'm ready, yes. Good morning, members. This is, as you can see, the annual report review for monitoring enforcement this time. So it's a summary of what we've been up to over the last year. And just wanted to, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I'm sure you want to get out in that lovely sunshine. But just a few things to draw out of the report, and I've got some photographs to show you which I know you find helpful. So firstly, just in relation to some of the points just to highlight from the report. Firstly, on the first page you'll see that there's in paragraph 4 and 5 I've set out some of the changes in legislation that have happened in the last year, and the most significant is the change in the immunity period, or periods as they were. So you'll be aware that after a certain amount of time unauthorised development becomes immune from enforcement action. And up until April last year there were 2 periods, 4 years for operational development, as we call it, basically building works, physical development of other sorts as well. And there was also a period of 10 years which applied to changes of use and breaches of conditions. The 4-year period, also applied to change of use of a building to a dwelling, but all other changes of use were subject to a 10-year period. But since April 24, they've been combined into one period of 10 years. So there's now just a single period of 10 years after which developments become immune from enforcement action. The legislation did include a transitional period. So developments that were substantially complete by April last year would be still subject to the 4-year period, if that was applicable previously. So if a building, for example, was completed prior to April 24 or substantially completed by that date, it would be subject to the 4-year period, not the 10-year period. But everything after that date would be, there would be a 10-year period that would apply. There's a few other changes that were introduced at the same time that I've set out in the report, but I won't go into those because they're relatively minor things. Moving on to the next part of the report. So this summarises the activity over the last year, and the first part is where we've issued formal notices. So we've issued 7 enforcement notices and a single temporary stop notice in the last year. A couple of those have been subject to appeals, which I'll come on to in a moment. I've also got some photographs of the 2 most recent enforcement notices that have been issued, which are at the bottom of page 82, I think, in your pack. So I'll come on to those when we look at the photographs. As I say, we've had 3 appeals. This is in paragraph 7, top of page 83. 2 of which have been allowed. I think members will be very much aware of the first of those at Rockingstone Farm at Birchover. And in fact, in both that case and the other case at Manor House, where an appeal was allowed, the service of the enforcement notice followed on from refusal of a retrospective planning application. And in both cases, we had appeals against the refusal of planning permission, and the appeals were allowed. The other case, the one at Hathersage Bankhouse Bar, we've recently had a decision on that one, and the appeal was dismissed, so the enforcement notice has come into effect, and the compliance period ends in about 6 days, I think. So we'll be obviously looking for that to be removed. Just highlighting some of the figures in the next section. So this summarises the sort of overall activity in monitoring enforcement. So over the last year, we've resolved 181 breaches, which is a really good figure when you look at what's happened in previous years. So last year, for instance, we resolved 103. So we've obviously resolved a very high number of cases. And as a result, and also because of continuing work on the backlog of cases, the overall number has reduced from 528 to 414. So again, a significant improvement. And as I've said in the report, over the last 2 years, it's reduced from 640 down to 414, which is a reduction of about 35% over the last 2 years. So that's really encouraging. I think that was all I wanted to draw out of the report. So if I just move on to the photographs. So firstly, we've got some photographs of the cases, as I mentioned, where we've issued enforcement notices in the last quarter. So you'll have seen this a short while ago at this meeting. You considered the application at Cornfield Barn. this morning, and you'll have seen these two structures, the former shipping container and the, what I might hesitate to call a pod on the right-hand side. So these have both now been the subject of an enforcement notice that was issued on the 19th of March. It's due to come into effect at the end of this month, subject to any appeal being received before that date. But as we've heard earlier, we understand that the intention of the owner is that those be temporary, and they have said that they wish to remove them, so we'll see what happens. This is the other case where we've issued an enforcement notice in the last quarter. This is land up at Owler Holmesfield, and there's 4 separate developments that we've issued enforcement notice against. So the building, obviously in the photograph, is one of those, and you can just see the sort of vehicle, ex-vehicle, to the left of that photograph. We've got another photograph of that one there.
Is that the library van?
That's the old, yeah, it was used as a mobile library, we believe, but it's, I'd hesitate to argue it's probably not mobile now. It is actually fitted out inside with a kitchen, and there's a bed in there, so it is being used for some kind of residential use, and that's part of the reason we've issued the enforcement notice. But unfortunately the photographs are relatively close up, but you'll see that, you know, the general setting is one of open countryside, and the structures on the site are visible from nearby roads, so they do have quite a landscape impact. This is the field shelter that's referred to, and then that is a composting toilet, apparently. So there's the 4 structures that are subject of the enforcement notice. This was issued at the end of, just near the end of March, and that's due to come into effect on the 9th of May. Again, that's subject to an appeal, so if they put an appeal in before the 9th of May, then that will suspend the notice coming into effect. And then we've got some photographs to show cases that have been resolved. So this is a listed building. The main issue, well, there's a few issues actually. There's the satellite dish, which hopefully you can see there. There's this window, which I'll explain from the next photograph. And then this lean-to porch. This is the after photograph. So the satellite dish is gone. This window has been replaced with a much more appropriate window, and the porch has been replaced as well with one with a slate roof. The previous one had a polycarbonate roof. So I think you'll agree, quite an improvement. This is at Hollow Farm at Yulegrave, the static caravan that's in the photograph. It's now gone. This is up at Crowden, a couple of quite substantial structures that were erected. It is an existing campsite, but these are not what we'd regard as tents, although they do look a bit like tents. They are basically buildings, or were. They've now gone. This is a listed building just down the road from the old hall on Creamery Lane, where you went on the site visit yesterday. So this is a wall that was demolished in the courtesy of a listed building. It's now been rebuilt. I've kept the best one till last. This is alongside the A5012 near Pike Hall, quite close to the site where the Why Not Festival is held. And you'll notice that The business that was advertising was actually a planning consultants and property development services, which is quite ironic.
Yeah, you have to watch these planners.
On the side of a lorry, but happily that's now been removed. I think that's the end of the photographs. Yeah. Okay, so if there's any questions about anything in the report, I'd be happy to
Bill?
answer.
Yeah, I've got a list of things. I hope it won't take too long. One's full questions. The first thing, the bank house was absolutely fantastic. People asked me about that. The period ends in 6 days. I've seen no evidence that that's anything's happened. It might be happening now, but yes. So what are the next steps when it isn't happening? Because people will ask me and people are concerned. And just as a general, this is not a planning comment really, but as just it's useful to remember that the bank house has become quite unpopular. I mean, it's popular, it's a popular venue, but with local people, not because they don't necessarily, some people dislike the structure, some people like the structure, but people don't like the fact that people do things without planning consent. And that is a real issue locally, and I'm sure elsewhere in the Peak Park. So I think that is worth bearing in mind. That message should go to businesses and developers or whoever, should they deem to do the same thing. So there's a question about the bank house. And I've also got a question about Rockingstone Farm. It was one of the first cases that came before this committee when I attended for the first time, and we did say we were very surprised and shocked at the decision, and we were going to write to the relevant authority about that, because I think although we haven't got, I don't know, we had got a legal standing, at least we could express our dismay at bad decisions. That should be used selectively. So I don't know whether that ever happened. I've got 4 more things. Would you want to answer those first?
Yeah, I can answer the question about Bank House, and I think maybe Brian will be able to answer your other question about Rockingstone. As with any enforcement notice, when the period for compliance ends and the enforcement notice has not been complied with, then essentially we're then into the realms of an offence being committed, because not to comply with the enforcement notice is an offence. So if that were to happen in this case, then we would look at essentially potentially taking prosecution proceedings for that offence. We have got a couple of other options, which are essentially to take direct action ourselves. You remember perhaps that we did that in the Cresbrook case. The other main consideration is whether to go for an injunction, but I wouldn't have thought that would be appropriate in that particular case. So I would say the main avenue we'd be looking at is potentially prosecution proceedings. So we would need to gather evidence and present a case to take that action.
Okay, so just on Rockingstone and 1 or 2 other cases, I have written to the Planning Inspectorate expressing some concerns, and obviously now we can also refer to the enhanced duty to further national park purposes, and we expect a high regard to landscape and special qualities within that. I got it was delayed for a long time. I wrote this letter back in probably autumn last year. So I got a letter I got a brief reply at the start of the year saying Planning Inspectorate was struggling for their own resources, and did I want to still wait for a reply, to which I said yes. So then I've had another reply this week saying they've allocated it to one of their officers and it's being dealt with now. Please bear with us. So I'm still expecting a reply. They don't change their decisions. It might raise some issues. It'll be interesting to see how they reflect on that. When I was at a recent Heads of Planning group across the national parks, an offer has been taken up to help the Planning Inspectorate with some training on national parks. So there are a couple of my counterparts which are leading on that, and we're offering to feed relevant cases in, so I can use the cases that I've written to as part of training for inspectors. So there is some useful things happening there.
Sorry, could I just add, just before we move on, just add to what Brian's just said. In a previous existence, when I was part of the Association of Local Government Archaeological Officers, the chair and deputy chair of that association did exactly the same thing when the planning inspectorate weren't taking any account of historic environment, cultural heritage, and were applying the old condition about watching briefs. And the planning inspector did, in the end, take up the invitation for some training, and their decision-making process did improve as a result. So I think it's entirely the right way to go.
And just briefly, I think next point is really interesting about the immunity period. I suspect that there'll be some arguments about whether something's been substantially complete before April 2024. That's what argument will be used, but that's something to look forward to, isn't it? So, yeah. Is there, I noted, I'm reading through all the enforcement notices that haven't been complied with, and some of them are very remote locations, such as the moorland or remote settlements or buildings, where a legal process is in train, are ultimately cost recoverable, because if an officer goes on site to Cartledge Flat or something, that's hours of work, isn't it? You know, to follow that up. Is that something that's totted up and we can get costs for? Because it's a you know, someone's breaking the law essentially, and it's costing the Peak Park money. So how does that? I'm interested how that stacks up.
It depends where you start from, I think.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, the answer is it does depend. But there is opportunity to claim costs. For example, where we do prosecute somebody, we would be able to claim back our legal costs, for example, or if we were to employ, you know, a barrister to act for us. So we would be able to claim costs back in those cases. Yeah.
Can you claim back investigation costs?
I think it's limited to legal costs. I don't think we can add officer time onto that.
Okay.
It just might be something worth pursuing, because I imagine they're quite significant, aren't they? If you're going up on the moors looking at something. And just two general points. I've mentioned this to a few people, it seems that the government, successive governments, have placed a high value on the landscapes of the national parks, quite rightly, including the Peak District, and it's supporting strong policies, and we often quote this at this committee. It strikes me that this is a critical and essential part of this, is providing sufficient and significant resources to monitor and enforce this. Because as we drive round, we often think, oh, I haven't noticed that before, what's happening there? It involves an enormous amount of resources to do the job effectively. I just wondered if we could, you know, make that specific point. I know we are asking government for more money and not getting it, but there is a very specific point here. It seems to me there's a big disconnect between what's being expected in terms of preserving a very important part of the national heritage and the resources being given by government to do that. Well, that was just that. I'll finish on that point.
Okay, I've got Mike next, then Matt.
Yes, thanks for this report, Andrew, and it's really pleasing to see the number of enforcement cases are dropping because of the investment in resources. And it's coming on to that point and linking it with what Bill was saying about Cartledge Flat, and I'm thinking of other examples, Mid Oak Moor and others, which are hard to reach. Would an investment in drone technology assist your work, do you think?
In what technology?
Drone technology, whereas instead of actually having to make a physical visit to a site, you send a drone up in the air to go and check on whether the plastic matting is still down on a particular...
But it reminds me of when I first came back here, and I was having a discussion with one of Brian's predecessors, a chap called John Anfield, about the reputation of the National Park Authority at that time. We're talking about the mid-80s. And I said, you'd be amazed at the stories that you hear out there. I said, the other day somebody told me that they actually flew over in a helicopter at bank holidays to look at the number of caravans. I said, can you imagine anything so ridiculous? He said, we do.
But it might be worth looking at from.
I think it's. I would have some very considerable reservations about that. Actually, I could see that it could work in a particular case, carefully directed. I think if it was a matter of common knowledge that these bloody drones flying over are wandering around trying to find things, I think there would be a grave reputational problem, quite apart from anything else. I think
it wasn't so much for finding for new stuff, but in terms of enforcement, where you've got stop orders in place.
On the whole, if you can't spot it on the ground, one wonders why anything else is necessary.
I am aware that some local planning authorities have made the use of drones, so it's something we have. I don't think we've seriously considered it yet, but it's certainly something we've had to think about to some extent. And in some cases, it might be quite helpful, as you say.
It needs circumspection, I think, is the short answer. Anybody else? Matt, sorry, yes.
Yeah, there were two comebacks, two things that two people have just said. So, it was interesting in terms of the backlog, that the backlog is going down, but there is still a backlog, and some of them have been there for some time. Thinking about the government, the funding position that we've got, is there a reasonable case to be made for making a capital intervention in that enforcement thing, so that to say we want to do this for a period of 2 years, or for a period of 2 years to try and deal with some of the backlog, so rather than that being a revenue thing, which we haven't got any money, from a capital point of view, there is a potential case for that. And the other one is that Moors for the Future have drones and are monitoring stuff, are monitoring landscape stuff using drones. And we're doing monitoring, and the work that David Alexander has been doing in terms will absolutely be appropriate for those sort of landscape scale things where they've got that sort of level of where I think he's using Sentinel satellite data, which is refreshed every 6 days. You would be able to see within a week whether something has been done. So that would definitely be worth talking to David about whether they can do stuff around that on those sort of large scale things.
There's a difference, I think, between directed investigations of that sort and what I might call sort of going on fishing trips with it. Yes, that's my point. Yeah. Okay. Anything else from Andrew's report? No. Jenny.
I just wanted to support Matt's observation, because we're likely, with the current financial situation, to have less resources all round. So to me, that would make absolute common sense to actually put some capital money in to get the enforcement backlog completed. So I support that. What Matt's just said, it makes common sense to me.
My only comment, Chair, will be to congratulate Andrew and his team on the progress they've made, and long may it continue, I would suggest.
I agree with that. Can I move it as to be noted? Seconded? Yes. All those in favour? Thank you very much. The last item on the agenda is the appeals outcomes of the report of the head of law, or by whatever name now known. Right. Who's it? Okay.
Yeah, if you want to. Thank you. Yeah. So there's 7 decisions come through here. 5 have been dismissed. So the 2 that have been allowed, one is relatively small domestic extensions. It's seen in the context of a sort of more modern estates and not regarded as harmful by the inspector in overall landscape terms. The second one relates to sort of historic application of agricultural occupancy ties, which normally get applied to, you know, if there's a new dwelling and you put a tie in, and you protect it for the agricultural need on the site. I think in this case, a tie had also been placed on the historic farm cottage. So the need for whether the two properties needed that was questioned, and there was sort of competing views on the value of the property and whether actually people could search for properties in the wider area just as easily as that existing property. So I think the fact that the permission also did control occupancy on the new build property was seen as sufficient by the inspector, so it was allowed to be relaxed from it, which is probably quite unusual now, I think, in terms of how we would apply. As policy, we wouldn't really expect the existing farm cottage to be tied as well now, would we?
Well, the danger is if you allow a new farm worker's dwelling as a second dwelling on the farm for a need, and without that tie, it's open to them to sell off the existing house, leaving you with one less, or questioning the need for the new building in the first place.
Yes, so it's about the functional need at that site, really.
It was something which was commonly used for many years, that second tie.
But I think in this case, the inspector felt that the value that listed farm property would have would be probably more than what was available in the area anyway. So there were other alternatives. So so that's the only other case. Some good successes in there. I think the inspector at Lower Damgate Farm noted that, you know, while a business use for wedding events had been previously permitted down there, actually we shouldn't just allow continued expansion of car parking and vehicular trips to get there. Actually, it is important to find other means of getting to these sites. You're in a special place, come and enjoy the venue, but actually we shouldn't just expand the landscape harm. And similarly, the large proposal for the agricultural building at Marnshaw Lane, Longner, was a good one. You know, and actually still upheld guidance that we've got in older supplementary planning guidance on siting and design, which shows that those guidance documents still have a value, even though it was produced, because I did it 20 odd years ago, but the principles of landscape and design are still being upheld, which is good.
Actually, I've only just thought about it, reading that one, the Marnshaw Lane one. It says that the SPG, it advises that we should reduce the visual impact of isolated buildings in dips and against a hillside. What was not the issue there whether it be near existing buildings? I mean, our policy says it should be near existing buildings.
Yeah, this is that's the starting point. Then we use guidance documents to sort of say how to inform that in the landscape. So there's clearly where it's prominent and skylining and very, very visual. That's something to avoid.
Okay, thank you very much. Matt.
Yeah, it's a question about the last one that you've talked about, where the appeal was allowed. Was there a new building built that was given? We gave planning permission for, because your point, John, about it not being tied is obviously that effectively allows almost unrestricted development on farms. If you can build a thing and say that you need it, so you could say it would be permitted development from a farm use point of view, and then sell off the original house. You could just carry on doing that and ad infinitum.
That's the policy reason, isn't it? Yeah.
But don't you start from a different point? You actually have to, in order to justify that new house, you have to prove the need. Yeah. If there is a need, then you'd lose any appeal subsequently if the need existed. If in due course those needs change, then it can be sold off. But that's been the case. I mean, I've been in planning since the 1960s, and I can tell you that argument has gone on for a long time. And it has always been the case that the main farmhouse, if it had no restriction on it, could be sold off. I mean, that's always been the case.
Which means we go through the use of a 106 agreement, so we don't put a condition on the existing house. So if you're approving a new house, if you're approving a new house, you, through a Section 106 agreement, you tie the new house to the existing buildings, house and all the land. And yes, circumstances do change. We had one recently near where I live where the farmer came to us and said, I want to make a modification to that legal agreement because I have this parcel of land which is not critical to my farm business and I would like to sell that off. So we looked through a new appraisal of the need for that, whether it was functionally still required or not, before allowing that to be disposed of or taken out of the Section 106 agreement. So there's that opportunity to manage the change, but we've moved on since the early days of slapping a second planning condition on, as it were, on the existing dwelling. It's all done through tying them through legal agreement.
It's interesting the way this report is worded on page 98. It starts off that the inspector felt that the main issue was whether the disputed condition, and it relates to the needs of agricultural workers generally in the area, not the needs of that particular farm. That's the starting point for his discussion. Yeah. Okay, can we note that report? All in agreement? Thank you very much.
Can I just come back to it?
Okay.
Can I carry on with that? Can I go back to the question?
If you like.
Yes. Where that appeal has been allowed, what does that become case? That's specific to that particular case, and so people wouldn't use that in case of a similar thing coming forward to say that was a justification where the appeal was allowed by the planning inspectorate, because if that was the case, then I'd really like to look at the policy associated with that to strengthen that.
The policy is very firmly in the National Planning Policy Framework, amongst other places.
I think they could try and use that as an example, but I think it's very fact specific. So, generally where they're trying to remove agricultural occupancy conditions, they'd have to demonstrate that there's no longer a need for that property in the local area and there's been no interest. So usually you have to submit marketing evidence to show that you've tried to market it and there's no local bauble workers or forestry workers that would be able to occupy it if you're trying to remove a condition of that nature in order to sell it on the open market. So I think it'd be very hard for them to use that as a sort of precedent, given the specific facts of that case.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. We have sort of noted it already, but just for the avoidance of doubt, all those in favour of noting it, those against, thank you. Right, it is 5 to 12. I'd just like to say one thing before we leave. This is Karen's last meeting with us, I am told.
Last planning committee.
Last planning committee. And she's certainly been around for as long as I've been on the authority looking at these things, giving me lots of nice stories about her trips to Australia and all these things. Ever helpful, ever obliging, always fun and often with a good smile on her face. And I would like it, please, you can't do this, you'll have to get somebody else to do it. Our appreciation of Karen recorded in the minutes. And we wish you all the best for the future. And I know you're going to sort of semi-retire in some way or other if you want to. I hope that works out for you. I hope that works out for you. But thank you very much indeed. And our best wishes go with you. Thank you very much. Right, I bring the meeting to a close.